And you're living from day to day, hour to hour out there, actually. If you dropped a shovel or something like that, or they thought you was trying to break it or something, they'd come over and beat the hell out of you. I mean, bad. They had no mercy. They had nobody to stop them.
My saying, I said over and over to myself, if one man is the only man that gets out of this, it'll be me.
You're having trouble believing in yourself. If I believe in you, how dare you not believe in yourself? Well, that was sobering. And it helped me to understand that even when I didn't feel I had done what I should do or could do or should do, I instead performed at some lower level, whatever it was. I had to believe in myself because whatever else, I had done my best.
I don't know. I would like to be able to tell you it was religion or it was family or it was love of country or it was faith. I really don't know. I just know that there were different things at different times that kept me going. And there were times when I didn't think I was going to make it. There were times when we'd get artillery coming in and I was completely fearless. I wouldn't care if I got killed or not. And then there were times when I really wanted to stay alive.
For most of human history, depending on the culture of the victors, combatants on the losing side in a battle could expect to either be slaughtered or enslaved. Historically, the treatment of POWs has varied greatly. Under the Geneva Convention of 1929 and 1949, to be entitled to prisoner of war status, a captured service member must be a lawful combatant entitled to combatant's privilege, which gives them immunity from punishment for crimes constituting lawful acts of war, such as killing enemy troops. Under the Geneva Convention, one of the main provisions makes it illegal to torture prisoners and states that a prisoner can only be required to give their name, date of birth, rank, and service number. In this film, we will follow the stories of 4 men through their time as prisoners of war during 3 major 20th century conflicts: World War II, Korea, and the Vietnam War. What you're about to see and hear are just some of the experiences of these brave veterans and patriots who are your friends and neighbors. It is a story about ordinary Americans persevering in extraordinary times and the survival of the human spirit. February 1942, U.S. Navy seaman Bill Ingram narrowly escaped the sinking of his ship, the USS Houston, by the Japanese near Java. After abandoning ship, he spent his first night in the water hanging only to a life ring. The next day, he was picked up by a Japanese patrol boat. After a forceful interrogation, the Japanese realized he did not have any important information and threw him overboard along with his life ring, only to be used as target practice by his captors. Miraculously, he escaped and was later rescued by a civilian fisherman. This boat contained a handful of other American sailors rescued by the fisherman. Bill and his fellow servicemen commandeered this boat, beached it, and once on land became captured again by the Japanese. Through a series of other stops, Bill went on in a sweltering heat to build the Burma-Thailand Death Railroad as depicted in the movie Bridge over River Kwai.
And we walked, I guess, for 3 or 4 hours, and we seen a Red Cross flag up on a building over there. And we went into the Red Cross building. Javanese people, they fed us, give us some clothes, and we all went and lay down, went to sleep that night. And during the night, they came along, and the Javanese did, and put a lock on each one of the cells. The Javanese had turned us over to the Japs. And they took us out of themselves one at a time. And I was the second or third guy out there, and they had a Jap sergeant there who spoke perfect English, and he asked me who the greatest man was, Tojo or Roosevelt. And I said, Roosevelt, when I did that, he socked me with his saber. And I was bleeding, and I was down on the ground, and he was kicking me with his boots, them hobnail boots that they wear. And that wasn't very pleasant, but when I got back up, they tell you, don't give them anything but your name, rate, and service number. And there's 7 guys out there with machine guns, and every time you move, they're following you with it. And he said, and somebody asks you a question, you can tell him what he wants to know, you know. And when I got back up, told you, Roosevelt just lost his top position.
During a cold winter day in 1951, U.S. Army Private First Class Richard Bassett was on an infantry outpost in the Kumwa Valley, South Korea. His small detail became surrounded by a numerically superior Chinese force, and after the fight, most of Richard's comrades were wiped out. Richard had no choice but to surrender. After capture, he was forced to march over 200 miles in the freezing cold from the South Korean border to Camp 5 in Pyeongtaong, North Korea. Richard spent the next 2 years in Camp 5 doing essentially slave labor.
We ran into an ambush. They were waiting for us. And 4 of us back there were under fire, and we returned fire. And then it got quiet. I was on the left flank, and my buddy was on the right flank. I kind of turned my head around like that. I looked over there, and my buddy's got his hand up. He was surrounded by Chinese, and they're pointing their burp guns at me. I couldn't kill them all. In fact, if I had fired at them, I'd have probably killed my buddy. And so I surrendered.
On his 22nd mission, May 1968, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander Giles Norrington was shot down by enemy anti-aircraft fire near Vinh, North Vietnam. He ejected safely from his A-5 Vigilante, though his hands were badly burned down to the muscle during the ejection. Once Norrington was on the ground and hidden in a field, he was able to radio search planes circling above him. If he'd had another 45 minutes, he might have been rescued. Giles spent the next 5 years in North Vietnamese captivity.
I was flying at the time that I was shot down, the RA-5C Vigilante. We could cruise comfortably at 600 knots, and that's 1,000 feet per second. However, if we were flying at a lower speed, and I was on the day I was shot down, which caused a smoke trail. And that smoke trail was, as I put it, a long black finger pointed right straight up to my airplane. It was a wonderful aiming device for the anti-aircraft artillerists on the ground. When I was hit, my right wing was blown clear of the aircraft. So the airplane, which was designed to fly with 2 wings, never flew so badly in its short life. I immediately realized that the aircraft was totally out of control. I initiated the ejection sequence. As I was in the parachute, I realized several things. One, my hands had been very badly burned. The next thing I realized, there was the sound of something like the buzzing of a bee. I realized fairly quickly that I was being shot at. And I had the extraordinary thought, it's one of those weird things that whether it's right, wrong, or appropriate, I said, my God, that's not fair. They just shot down my airplane and now they're shooting at me in the parachute. It just isn't fair. Well, over the next 1,775 days, a lot of things happened to me that weren't particularly fair.
December 1967, U.S. Army Major Hal Kushner, flight surgeon for the 1st Squadron, 9th Cavalry, the unit depicted in the film Apocalypse Now, was aboard a helicopter near Doc Pho, South Vietnam. Flying through a lightning storm at night, their chopper suddenly crashed into a South Vietnam mountain. The ensuing flames and disorder caused M60 machine gun ammunition aboard the helicopter to explode, sending multiple rounds into Hal's shoulder. Hal was the only one aboard to survive the crash. After staying with the downed chopper 3 days, he left to find his freedom. 4 hours later, rescue came, but he was too far from the crash site to signal for help. Hal was soon captured and spent the next 5.5 years in captivity.
I was wounded. I had broken my collarbone, and I had these M60 rounds in me, and I had broken my left wrist, and broke, or 6 or 7 teeth were broken or lost. I walked about a mile at the bottom of the mountain, and I saw the sun up there, and I saw helicopters hovering over the site. Could hear them too. And I went, oh, if I just stayed there, 4 more hours, I could have made it. But I've been there 3 days and 3 nights, and I had had nothing to eat but rainwater. That was it. I saw this guy working in a rice paddy, and he and I saw each other at the same time. And I had my fatigue jacket on, which had a caduceus and captain's bars, and he said, "Dai wee boxy, dai wee boxy," which means Captain Doctor. And he took me about a mile or so down the trail to this little hooch, and he brought me out a can of sweetened condensed milk. I'll never forget this. And a C-ration can opener. And I opened the can. I was holding this like this, opening this can, and he gave me a C-ration spoon, one of those plastic spoons. And this stuff was just like, it was the best stuff I'd ever eaten in my life. It was like vanilla pudding. And I started eating that, and he motioned, and then this squad of VC came and picked me up. This guy runs up to me, and in English, a very young guy, he had an M2 carbine. He ran up to me and he said, "Surrender, no kill," in English. Surrender, no kill. And he motioned to put my arms up. And I had my left arm tied like this, and I went like this. And he shot me. He shot me right in the neck. He went right through my neck, right over where the M60 rounds were. And so they bound me with commo wire. I had a Geneva Convention card in my wallet, and I tried to show them that, to show that I was a doctor, and you're supposed to, you're not a POW, you're a retained personnel by the Geneva Convention. I had this white card with a red cross on it, and I showed it to him. He tore it up.
We were in Singapore, I think, for a couple of weeks. Then they loaded us aboard a transport, and that was a jolly trip. They was packed in there like sardines. There was almost only standing room. And we were going from Singapore to Molamine, Burma. And it was a couple of weeks trip on there, and boy, that was the same way. We had no water. We got very little food. I think we got 1 meal a day on there, and all that was a big ball of rice or a bunch of rice. And some of the guys was desperate for drinking water, and they drank their own urine. Quite a few of us did, because we couldn't get no water. And we got to Molamine, Burma, and they told us, there's going to be all kinds of good food up here, and you get vegetables in the jungle and all that. And it was worse than what it was in Singapore. And we started in, that's where we got started on the railroad.
And we walked all the way around to Pyongyang, their capital. And on the way, we slept in caves. The first night, I guess we stopped there about 4 o'clock in the morning. And they put us, the 4 of us, in a little old hole that was really would have been hard for 2 people. And that's the way we did all the way up. I think the second or third day, they stripped us down and took away our uniform. Next to getting captured, that was the most humiliating experience, And they gave me an old Korean uniform. And that thing was filthy. It had blood on it, and it was full of lice. That was my introduction to lice. And we cultivated those babies for a long time. Mercy.
I was shot down in Ha Tin province, which is about 15 miles south of Vinh City. When I was moved, and it took about 3 days to get to a small holding camp in Vinh. Those 3 days were spent either walking or very briefly in the back of a truck. Well, I was first in Newguy Village and then moved to Little Vegas in what later became Camp Unity in the so-called Hanoi Hilton. I was there for so long as I was being interrogated for military information. And as I was moved from that camp to the plantation, I realized that although there were occasionally interrogations for military information, for the most part they were looking for propaganda.
And then they started marching me, and the march was 30 days. Marched me mostly at night, always to the west, toward the mountains. It was very dark. I couldn't see well. I didn't have glasses. They took my boots. I was hurt and sick. First day I was captured, they took me into this place. It was like a little village and tied me to a door, and this kid came out and beat me with a bamboo rod. About midway of that journey, the 30-day journey, and I got very weak and very sick. And I went into this camp, and this old man, I'll never forget this, never forget it. My fatigue jacket was covered with blood and pus, and I had maggots in my wound. And this old man came out, and he took my fatigue jacket, and I thought he was taking it as a souvenir, and I kind of fought against him, and he took it in the river, and he washed it, and he dried it over a fire, and he brought it back, and he took a cigarette and burned the leeches off my legs and ankles. I mean, it was a significant act of kindness in a very, very difficult time, and it made a big impression on me.
We had to move, we was just building a grade for the road there. We had to move 1 meter of dirt a day per man. We had 500 guys at camp. We had to move 500 meters of dirt a day before, up on that railroad bed, before we could go home for that day's work. We only did half of our group. We started at Molamine, Burma. We went down to the Thai border, and then the British and them was coming from Bangkok. It was going north, so we met at the middle. But I don't remember being in the middle because I got the malaria real bad, and I was out of it. But I was just like I am now. I was moving around and doing stuff, I guess, during the day, but I have got no idea. The last 2, 3 camps that we were in, that I don't remember it. I have no memory of it at all. And moving rocks, and when they had to move a big rock out, get 100 guys on it, just push it till it finally moved. When you got down to 10 hours out there at that railroad, the only damn thing you want to do is get in that bunk and lay down and go to sleep, because you know you had to get up at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, go back out for another 10 hours. So they wasn't no singing, nothing like that. There's people with malaria we had to tie down because they were delirious, and they would just get up and wander around the camp in a stupor. They didn't know where they were at. The one guy said he told the guy next to him, he said, "I'm going down to the corner. I got 2 tickets back to Wichita." He said, "You want to come with me? Let's go. I got 2 tickets." And he was going to take his buddy to go down and catch the bus, go to Wichita, because he was in malaria. He had these illusions. And they were just, it was hell all the time. There was no rest.
When we finally got to the camp, they took these old uniforms off of us, and with the lice, hopefully. But we were issued their winter uniforms. Then we had cotton padded shoes, the camp shoes were cotton padded. We had cotton padded pants, and we had a cotton padded blouse. And then we had a cotton padded hat. So we were pretty well covered. But even then, when the average day is 35 below zero, that's not much. And they would get us up at 4:30 in the morning. And we'd have to go down to the parade field and stand there in the cold. And the camp commander would speak to us in Chinese. And the Screaming Skull, we called him, our interpreter, spoke beautiful English. He interpreted for the camp commander. And he's a pretty sharp little guy, very intelligent, and spoke good English. But boy, he was a rascal. I mean, he asked you the same questions over and over and over again, and they wrote down everything you said. So if you contradicted yourself, he'd say you're lying. Yeah, they tried to indoctrinate us, and they kept insisting that, you know, everything was just hunky-dory and under communism, but under capitalism, you all were the slaves to the warmongers. Okay? We knew they were lying, particularly us guys that were captured last, you know, or late. We were very fortunate in this. That's when 1,600 men died in that camp.
We had several methods for communicating, and I must say that communicating with one another was the most important thing we did. It was so important to know that you were not alone and to let the other prisoner know that he was not alone. The secondary reason for that was to find out who was in the system, who had been seen alive, who was in the room next door, who was in the camp where you were before you came to where you are. We tapped on the walls. We developed a system. It was not Morse code. It was what, as Boy Scouts, I learned as the 5x5 code. What that meant was there were 5 blocks across and 5 blocks down. In each of those blocks was a letter. In the top left-hand corner would be 1, 1. First row, first column, the letter A. So in my case, tapping my initials, GN, would be tap, 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 second row, second column for a G, tap, 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 third row, third column for the N. It was a system that most of us learned pretty well. A few of us absolutely mastered this method of communication. And tapping would be a blur. It would be a sonic blur. And yet, 2 people who were skilled at it could communicate at only slightly lower than the normal rate of speech. In 5x5, the letter we left out was Q. The second method of communication was hand signals. The first letter of the alphabet would be 1. The second letter, which would look like a B, was a B. The third would be C, all the way to a few letters that we could not figure out how to describe them visually. Q is one of those letters, and we simply use the very familiar birdie, the third finger up. They worked for us. And Z was another one. So the Z was the last letter, and the Z was thumbs down. Nothing can simulate torture except torture. There's no way to prepare yourself psychologically and physically. It's very, very difficult to prepare yourself. The best you can do is imagine the worst and know that somehow it's going to be worse than that. That was the case for those of us who were mishandled. If we got to a point where we could no longer resist, I'm speaking collectively now, if we are at a point where we could no longer resist, we would do everything we could to make a statement that was utterly useless and not believable. That way, we hoped our government would realize that we were not betraying the Armed Forces Code of Conduct. I was once asked during interrogation how fast my airplane flew. Well, that's not the kind of question you really want to answer honestly, and they knew that. So the first time they said, "How fast is your airplane?" I said, "It's fast." And I got swatted alongside. They had knocked off my stool. I got back onto the stool and I was asked again, even more emphatically, "How fast is your airplane?" Well, I thought for a moment and said, "It's very, very fast." Bang. There I was down on the floor again, got back up. I said, "This is not going to work." He said, one last time, "How fast is your aircraft?" Now, you need to know that my aircraft could fly Mach 2. What I answered to him, perfectly truthfully, my airplane will fly more than 120 miles an hour. He wrote this down, offered me a cigarette, gave me a piece of candy, and sent me back to my cell. I found out that there was a way to beat the system. Tell the truth, but tell the truth in such a way that it is utterly unusable.
Life was very, very hard, and half of us died. When I was captured, at the end of the 30 days, I arrived at my first American POW camp. And it was way high up in the mountains. We needed ropes to get up there, and I needed a lot of help pushing and stuff to get there. And when I got there, I expected to see large numbers of American prisoners and kind of a Stalag 17 thing, maybe with guard towers and Red Cross packages and a hospital I could work in. And what I saw was these pitiful hooches high in the mountains, and there were 4 Americans the worst looking guys I had ever seen. There were 2 Marines, and they were raggedy, and they had rotten teeth, and they had long matted beards, and they were barefoot, and they just looked like hell. And they told me they had had another person, a Special Forces captain, who had died in September. But what were things like? The first 2 years, we had no clothes, we had no shoes, we had no mosquito nets, we had no hammocks, we had nothing to sleep on. We ate 3 coffee cups of rice a day most of the time. In the rainy season, which was 3 months long, we had 2 coffee cups of rice a day. And it's not white rice, it was red rice that was shot through with rat feces and weevils that had been hidden in the caves since the French War in the 50s. And in our camp, 27 Americans came through it, 10 died, all but the Special Forces captain that I told you about, who died before I got there. 9 died in my arms, and we starved to death. We died of malnutrition, we died of our wounds, we died of depression. I'm sure that 2 men just decided, I can't live like this anymore, and they gave up and died. In 1971, in February, I think the Vietnamese decided that they could not keep us alive, and the prisoners had become a big political football and bargaining chip at that time. And I think they decided they couldn't keep us in the jungle, so they decided to move us to Hanoi, and they put us in a prison called the Plantation, which was an old French prison. There, it was not a daily struggle for survival. We got up there in March '71 after the real rough stuff had stopped. You know, when they did all the gratuitous torture to the pilots, they tied them up, and rope tricks and all that stuff had stopped. And we were just in a jail, an old hot jail, and I was in a room with 6 other people, and they gave us 2 meals a day, bread and a coffee cup full of pumpkin soup. Got 3 cigarettes a day, which we never got in the South, and got to come out twice a week and shave, dry shave, and take a bucket and pour water over you from a well. twice a week, and then you go back in your cell. That was it.
But the next thing I know, they was some C-47s come down there from Calcutta and picked us up. They got it loaded up, all the Americans. And I remember getting on the airplane, but I don't remember the ride from Bangkok to Calcutta. And then I come out of it in Calcutta just for a little flash, I guess. And I'm in a blue shirt, a blue sweater, like the Navy shirt, our blue sweaters we have, and a white hat. Where did I get a white hat in Calcutta? I haven't got any idea. I come out of it. I come out of stupor after we got to New York, and I woke up and was sitting at a bar with these guys. These guys are all from New York and New Jersey. Musto, Berge, Fergus, Schwartz was their name. 4 guys from New Jersey, them. And they were all boozing up over there, and I got a head of lettuce down there. I don't even remember ordering a head of lettuce or why I ordered it. But I was sitting there eating a head of lettuce. I had some money. They gave us some money in Calcutta, and I was sitting there at the bar crying, and the bartender came out and said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I don't know how to get home." And I didn't. I had no idea. All I knew I was in a bar. And he said, well, he took his apron off and took me down and put me on a train to Springfield, Illinois. And I got home, then I didn't know where I lived at, because my folks had moved. And that took half a day to find out where I lived at after I got home. So I finally got enough sense to go. I got a taxi cab and went to my old address at home, and I knocked on the door, and the people said, well, they lived down there on 9th Street over the grocery store. And I went down there, and the grocery store had already closed down, and the back end was a beer joint, and I went in the beer joint and asked the guy, I said, "You know where Willie Ingram lives at?" And he said, "Yeah, out there in North Grand somewhere out there." He said, "They across from the high school." So I got back in the taxi, we went out there, and I was knocking on doors. "You know where Willie Ingram lives?" I said, "No, I didn't know." So we saw the mailman. He said, "Yeah, about 2 houses down there. That's the Ingrams down there." So I went up, knocked on the door, and my mother come to the door, and she let out a scream and just went boing. She almost fainted, you know. And that was a dumb thing to do. I should have made arrangements ahead to let them know I was in town. But I didn't know any better.
Well, the Screaming Skull, he called us all out on the parade ground, and he's jumping up and down like a baboon, waving his arms, and he says, "You're going home!" We looked at each other. He's lying. We're not going home. He said, "You're going to be divided into 2 groups. And the first group will go home in 3 days. And the second group will go home a week later." Naturally, I was in the second group. In the last truck.
Operation Big Switch swings into high as each day is a receiving center at Panmunjom. Despite their harrowing ordeal, some summon the strength to wave as freedom nears and allied officers await them. Some leap from the trucks at the sight of Freedom Gate, but there are others not so fortunate, those who bear the testimonial of wounds and neglect in the red prison camps. Others are completely dazed and are restrained from jumping blindly, unable to comprehend it all. The most seriously disabled are rushed to the helicopter landing area for transfer to base hospitals. Already several hundred of the returned prisoners have been found to be in critical condition. A high percentage have been found to be suffering from tuberculosis. Contrast these wrecks of men to the North Koreans and Chinese returned by the Allies to the exchange point, well-fed, well-clothed, and defiant after months of humane treatment they received in UN prison camps. This is their gateway, where red officers wait to greet them.
It was a little bit of heaven. That's the best way I can say it. And we sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and that was the most beautiful sight I think I've ever seen. It really was. There was a colonel there from West Palm Beach, and he was in civilian life, he was the director of the circulation department for the Palm Beach Post, Palm Beach Times, which I had a route, and I knew him well. And he grabbed a hold of me. He said, "Don't say a word." He took me through that, and within 6 hours, I was on a plane headed home. The rest of the guys took them about 3 or 4 days to process to get out of there. 22 months and 6 days, and my old second brother and Mom and Dad met me at the airport. And I got off that plane, and they put me in the car. My brother was driving. I said, "Man, slow down." He says, "Well, Dick, I'm only going 40 miles an hour." I says, "Slow down. Slow down."
The day of my shoot down was the 5th of May, 1968. The day of my release was March 14th, 1973. The span between those two dates is 1,775 days, which seems like a lot. But when I look at the people like John McCain, who was there for almost 2,000 days, or Ev Alvarez, who was there for over 8 years, I seldom brag about the time I was there. I simply state it as a fact. I was released from captivity as a part of the peace agreements that were signed in Paris by the 4 parties. And when I was released, or I should say when I was notified of my release, I was with 135 Americans, one of whom was John McCain. One of the others was Dick Tancheman, my navigator. At Clark Air Force Base, we were greeted by an incredible group of people. The entire Kitty Hawk, USS Kitty Hawk, Air Wing had rented every bus there was in Subic Bay, and they had come to Clark Air Base to greet us home. At one point, with all the windows open on the bus, a little kid ran out as we went around the corner in our bus and shoved through the window a big piece of cardboard with something metallic wrapping it. And the window it came through, I was sitting next to Ned Schumann, who I'd cruised with twice, once in the Mediterranean, once in the Tonkin Gulf. And Ned Schumann looked at this thing and said, "Here, this is for you." It was the first POW bracelet I received, and the kids in the family had taken a piece of cardboard and created for themselves a big welcome home card. The point is, there were 4 buses, 20 or 30 windows on every bus, and that placard was passed through the one window on 4 buses where I was seated. I consider that something of a small miracle.
The release ceremony. For the first time, the day we were released, they kept us in this shed in the airport, and when my name was called, I went out and there was a long table. There were Vietnamese and Americans at the table. And there was an Air Force Brigadier General in Class A uniform. And I called my name and I went forth and saluted him. And after all, that was a courtesy that we had been denied the whole time we were captured, to recognize each other's rank. And I'll never forget, I noticed this guy, he had breadth, he had thickness. We were skinny. I mean, we were rail skinny, and this man he had a thick chest and he had breadth, and his hair it was plump and moist, and our hair looked like straw. And so I saluted this general. I wish I knew his name. And he returned my salute, and I shook hands with him, and he just hugged me, and he said, "Welcome home, Major Kushner. We're glad to see you, Doctor." And there were tears streaming down his cheeks. And of course, I just broke down when he did that. And each man had a packet, and they gave you a packet. And in the packet, it told you what had happened to your family. I mean, some people had lost their parents, or wives had left them, or whatever, and what happened to your family. And I had a son who had been born in April. I was captured, remember, in December. Michael was born in April, and I had known that he was a son. I had found out, but just found out after the war was over. A fellow from Chicago who was a captain stationed in the Philippines, and he escorted me on the plane, C-141. I saw this beautiful white C-141 with American flag emblazoned on it, and it just reduced me. It was the first time we had seen our flag. Pardon me. But anyway, we got on the plane. The plane had these really cute flight nurses. You know, they had, I'm sure they picked them special, all these tall girls. They were blonde and beautiful and good figures. And we got on the plane and sitting there, and everybody was cheering, and this nurse came up and she said, "You can have anything you want. We have beer, we have we have anything you want. We have sandwiches, hamburgers. What would you like?" And I said, "I want a Coke with crushed ice and a pack of gum." And she brought me a pack of juicy fruit gum and a Coke with crushed ice.